What's going on, everyone? I hope you're all well. I'm gonna have to come clean. I may not know what this week's recipe is, and that is because I recorded this a few weeks ago, to whatever time I'm releasing this recipe now, just to try and save me some time. So I apologize, but I would go as far as to say that this recipe is probably going to be the best one we've ever done. Let's find out. Here we are at the table, and today we are making a silky smooth baked chocolate tart with a melt in the mouth sablé pastry case and a rich chocolate custard filling. This dessert is going to smoke every other dish at the table. So sablé pastry first, and you're going to need 130 grams of unsalted butter, 80 grams of icing sugar, 4 eggs, 240 grams of flour, 45 grams of ground almonds, and a half teaspoon of salt. Now, this pastry is made a little bit differently to most other pastries, as we're actually going to whip up the butter first to soften it. I'm using a standing mixer here, but feel free to use an electric hand whisk if you want. So cream the butter in the mixer, and if necessary, scrape the butter down the bowl and beat again to really soften and whip it up. Then add the icing sugar to the bowl and beat everything together until light and fluffy. You can't really overdo it at this stage, so go to town. While the butter and the icing sugar is whipping up, you can start separating your eggs and adding your yolks to the bowl one by one, whipping everything together. Once all your yolks are added and you have a nice airy fluffy mixture, you can add your flour, ground almonds and your salt. Then carefully mix the dry ingredients into the butter mixture until everything is just combined. Don't go too hard at this stage, you can overmix the dough at this point and you'll end up with a tough pastry. So just enough to combine everything together. Then scrape down the bowl and finish mixing this dough together with your hands. Transfer to the table and then work to a smooth dough. It won't take much. Then cover the dough and chill in the fridge for at least 2 or 3 hours to allow the pastry to rest properly and to firm up before we roll it out. Now's a good time to set yourself up with a deep 8-inch flan ring on a lined baking sheet ready to make your pastry case. After the pastry is chilled, place it on a lightly floured surface and begin to roll it out gently. This is a pretty delicate pastry, so you have to take it easy here and handle it gently in order not to break it up into tiny little pieces. Don't stress too much about the pastry cracking around the edges like this. It's going to happen as you roll it out, but what we don't want is them to get too big. Gently roll the pastry out, turning after every roll just to make sure the dough isn't sticking to the surface. If the dough feels tacky or like it's sticking at any point, carefully lift the dough up, dust lightly underneath with a little bit of flour and continue rolling as before, making sure you're moving the pastry around constantly as you roll it. Check the pastry is the right size by placing the ring in the centre and making sure it comes up at least about an inch above the edge of the tin, which this one does easily. Then don't pick up the dough with your hands, you'll only break it up. Instead, roll the pastry carefully onto your rolling pin like a scroll and lift it up this way. This will support the pastry much better and you won't risk it falling to pieces when you're trying to move it around. Grab the ring on the lined tray and carefully unroll your pastry over the ring, being careful not to touch the ring itself with the rolling pin. If this happens, you're just going to cut right through that pastry and you're going to end up with a giant biscuit instead of a pastry case. Once you've unrolled your pastry over the tin, carefully lift the edges of the pastry up and press them into the tin. Work like this all the way around the pastry case, pinching the edges of the pastry into the edges of the tin. Now, this pastry is a little bit tricky to work with, so it does have a tendency to break apart a bit, but thankfully, along with being a nightmare to work with, it's also very forgiving when it comes to patching it up. Just use pieces of the pastry dough and press it into any cracks or holes you may have. We're going to fill this case later anyway, so no one will ever know unless you tell them. So just pretend you smashed it first time. I like leaving the pastry to hang over the ring to help combat any shrinking that happens during the cooking. But I do trim around the edges just a little bit to tidy things up and to keep hold of that spare pastry and use it for something else in the future. Once this is done, prick the base with a fork to help keep the base nice and flat while it's cooking, and then stick the whole thing into the fridge to rest and chill for about 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, remove the pastry from the fridge and line with a circle of parchment paper, fill with baking beans and bake blind at 190 degrees C for 20-25 minutes or until the pastry is a rich golden brown. Then you can remove the pastry case from the oven, remove the baking beans, then place it back into the oven for another 5 minutes just to crisp up the base. don't be afraid of getting a bit of colour on this pastry. We're putting a wet filling into this case later on, and we want it to be firm and crisp at the end of all this. Not pale, soft and soggy. Aim for a rich golden brown like this. You'll thank me later. While the pastry case is cooking and drying out, you can start getting the filling ready for this tart. So place 200 grams of milk and 200 grams of double cream into a saucepan and bring the whole lot to the boil. Once boiling, throw in 300 grams of dark chocolate and remove the pan from the heat. I'm using 54% bittersweet chocolate, but you use what you like. Now get a whisk in there and mix together the cream, the milk and the chocolate until everything is completely homogenized, meaning that the chocolate should be completely melted and the mix is silky smooth. If it looks grainy or bitty, then just keep mixing it. If you discover that the chocolate doesn't melt completely, then you may need to put it back over a gentle heat just to finish the job. But I don't think you'll have any problems. Then, once everything is mixed completely, we're going to add 2 large eggs to the chocolate mix, and once again, whisk the whole lot together until smooth. I mean, I know it has raw egg in it, but man, I just really want to stick my face in this thing. Look at it. So, resist the urge to plunge your face into the pan and strain the mixture through a sieve into a jug. Just to make sure you remove any of the bits of egg that are prone to not breaking down, like this thing that I always struggle to pronounce, leaving us with an incredibly smooth filling ready to go into our tart. So take your blind baked pastry case from the oven and turn the oven down to 140 degrees. Then, while the case is still warm, pour in the chocolate filling all the way to the top of the pastry. Now I'm doing this at the table for the camera, but then I have to make a perilous journey to the oven, dodging obstacles like baby toys, furniture, wires from lighting and jumping dogs. But you can avoid all this stress by filling the pastry case in the oven itself, so you don't have to carry a full to bursting pastry case around, risking it spilling everywhere. Keep the pastry case on the oven shelf and pull it out just enough for you to fill it, then gently slide it back into the oven. Bake for 20 to 25 minutes at 140 degrees C until the chocolate filling is just set. It should have a little wobble to it like jelly. If it's sloshing around or rippling like you're throwing a stone in a pond, it's going to need longer cooking. But every oven is different, so you're going to need to keep an eye on it. Once it's cooked, take it out of the oven and leave the tart to cool on the tray in the ring for at least an hour. The residual heat should finish off the cooking of this tart, so you'll end up with something that is just set and has this unbelievable melt in the mouth texture. You can see that it's just set here, a little wobble, unbelievable shine. I'm a little disappointed with the small cracks on the surface, but that has just come from me checking it a little bit too early, and perhaps a little bit too roughly, but I know it's not going to affect the final result of this tart. Once cool, use a sharp or serrated knife to trim the edges of the pastry all the way around the tart. Use the ring as your guide and angle the blade away from the chocolate filling to avoid getting any crumbs on top of the tart. Though if you do, a few crumbs aren't going to hurt, I promise. Then all that's left to do is transfer the tart to a board. I'm using a flat base of a cake tin to help support the tart while I move it. You definitely don't want to ruin it after all this hard work, so please don't rush this bit. Now all you have to do is cut yourself a couple of slices and serve it up. I mean, I could just eat it like this all by itself, but for the sake of this video, I'll add a few other things to the plate. But I'm not making an effort, because it's really all about this chocolate tart. Fine, I'll reposition these raspberries, but that's it, that's all I'm doing. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you like this recipe, let me know by hitting that thumbs up down below. And if you're new here and you like what you see, why not consider subscribing as well? I really appreciate it. If you like this video, head over to my channel. I've got tons of them just like this one. And if you like your recipes written down, you can always head over to my website and find them all there. Links as always down below, not my crotch, in the description. Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook. I love to see what you guys are getting up to. I will see you in the next one.